Windhorse is our innate ability to uplift ourselves and our environment by giving rise to a positive energy that is both relaxed and disciplined. Since 1981, Windhorse Community Services has integrated this understanding with modern conventional therapies, meditation, and contemplative traditions in the development of at-home, whole-person mental health recovery. Windhorse Journal is dedicated to the mission of communicating decades of clinical and personal experience to professionals, educators, students, and anyone seeking recovery options. Please join the dialogue.
Welcome to Windhorse Journal Entry 65, Walking the Path of Healing Discipline. This conversation brings together a group with over 180 years of combined experience in contemplative psychology. Moderator Chuck Knapp is joined by Jeffrey Fortuna, Eugenie Morton, Kathy Emery, and Blake Bailey. They discuss the origins of the Windhorse approach and the recent release of Healing Discipline, a publication derived from the original teachings of Ed Podvoll. They explore what contemplative psychology is, dream work, and the inherent wakefulness and innate sanity ever present throughout the human experience. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome everyone to the Windhorse Journal. I'm your host, Chuck Knapp, and we're very pleased to be presenting today's podcast, which will be a discussion about the recently published book, Healing Discipline. Throughout the Windhorse approach's history, there have been a lot of articles written about our work, but Healing Discipline is the first book to be published, aside from Ed Podvoll's The Seduction of Madness in 1991, and its republishing as Recovering Sanity in 2003. Our four guests for this conversation are all longtime colleagues and friends, Jeff Fortuna, Kathy Emery, Blake Bailey, and Eugenie Morton. Would you all please introduce yourselves and share what you think would be useful for us to know about you? Jeff, do you want to start?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. This is the first time that I know of where a group of people has sat down together to talk about Healing Discipline, the book. So welcome. I began my Windhorse career with the founding of the Windhorse Project in 1981. So I was one of the co-founders of the project, which was our first foray into intensive home care. And I've been involved with Windhorse since then, so nearly 40 years now since the founding. And in the early 2002 or so, I founded the Windhorse Legacy Project, which we can talk a little bit more about later, which is the nonprofit program that's published Healing Discipline, published this book. Yeah, that's pretty much who I am.
Thank you, Jeff. Kathy, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Chuck. And great to be here with all of you on this occasion. So my experience or connection with this, with the Windhorse work also began in the early 80s. I was around in those early days when Windhorse was founded. So I've basically been involved with this practice ever since. And it's been my life's work. It's been my inspirations. I feel like my whole life is an expression of what I understand, whatever I understand about the Windhorse approach, I feel is kind of one piece in my life. And so right now I work with Windhorse Community Services here in Boulder and also with Windhorse Elder Care. So different populations, of support, and just continue to feel really appreciative and have tremendous gratitude for somehow having been around when all of this arose in those moments.
I think I can go next. So my name's Eugenie Morton, and I wasn't exactly sure why I was invited to this group, but then I thought we're going to have a pretty diverse audience, and I have a particular voice. So anyway, I'm happy to be here and excited about perhaps what I can learn from listening to you all during this time, and also what I can offer. So I came into this world after graduating from Naropa University in the mid to late 80s. where I first began a contemplative practice, and was very lucky to land in the kind of the beginning phases of this as a natural extension of the personal reflections I was doing that were then kind of bridging into the reflections of what does that then look like when you're beginning to work therapeutically or clinically with people. So it was a gateway, and have had the good fortune of being in community with like-minded folks we've been mentoring each other for a very long time, and it's been great, and I'm glad to continue on.
Thank you, Eugenie.
Hi, I'm Blake Bailey. Thank you for tuning in. I realized as I was sitting here listening to you all introduce yourselves that I'm sitting here with my Windhorse family of origin. Mm. Really, I first met Kathy Emery when I interviewed for the Contemplative Psych program in 2000. And my very first Windhorse team in 2002 included Chuck as the first supervisor, and then Jeff came in later as a supervisor, and Eugenie interviewed me for a basic attender position as the team leader of this team. And 18 years later, this team is still going. So some teams are short-lived and others can feel like they turn into family. Mm-hmm. So I've been involved with Windhorse, like I said, for the last 18 years. And I, like Kathy, feel like it's an expression of my life. I try to live the Windhorse principles in my home with my two children and my wife. You can see I'm a cat owner, and I figured it was better to let the cat in than have it bug us throughout this podcast. And I just look forward to speaking more about and learning more about this book, Healing Discipline.
Thank you, everyone. Before jumping in, I want to say it's a total honor to be hosting you all today. I've been really looking forward to this. I also want to say a bit about Ed's voice as it comes through this book. I knew Ed as a friend and mentor, and reading Healing Discipline took me back to the atmosphere he'd create when teaching. His passion and compassion and profound curiosity were absolutely contagious, and it's all present in this book. I haven't had as much fun reading something in a long time as this book. In the foreword to Healing Discipline, Karen Wigella, herself an author of excellent books and a longtime pillar of Naropa University's Contemplative Psychology Department, wrote this beautiful description of her first experience with Ed's teachings. She had just attended a couple of classes, I think in 1979, yeah. So she said, Ed brought together the clinical work of psychotherapy with the teachings on inherent wakefulness presented in Buddhism. I had been searching for a way to think about these two seemingly disparate practices in my own life. While I knew other meditators and I knew other therapists, I didn't know anyone who could address how they worked together. I knew that they did somehow, but I didn't know how. Ed was the first person that I met who could not only articulate the ways in which each practice could enhance each other, but he also could show how they could be applied in practical ways in clinical work. I moved to Boulder some months later. I was hooked. And Jeff, you're the person responsible for bringing this all together. And you've really managed to have Ed's voice and compassion come through in a very clear way. So congratulations on your work. And I'd like to start by asking you a couple of questions.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So would you please tell us a little bit about the Windhorse Legacy Project?
Sure. So when we first began the Windhorse work in 1981, soon after beginning that, we established a therapeutic community here in Boulder, which lasted 6 or maybe 7 years. And we closed that community at what we felt was the end of its life cycle. And we all sort of went our separate ways. Little did we know that the Windhorse work, or I should say, the Windhorse that we had invoked had a mind of its own. And that work demanded to be continued. And so we did continue. We sort of resurrected the work in different ways in the early 90s. And by the end of that decade, around the turn of the century, it became clear to some of us that we had learned a great deal. Ed had published, as you mentioned, Chuck, he had already published The Seduction of Madness, which later became Recovering Sanity, and that we had learned a great deal, and we had already had a wealth of experience and understanding. And I began to have the feeling that was starting to accumulate a kind of critical value, like crossing a critical threshold of value and significance. And by the time I returned here to Boulder after being away for a period of time in, as I mentioned, around 2002 or so, and Ed was here at the same time for that year, and he had already given to me, when he went into retreat, he had already given to me to keep in safekeeping his audio recordings of all of his classes at Naropa, his lecture notes, his published and unpublished manuscripts, all kinds of things, all kinds of clinical notes. And so the recorded written material was also increasing. So I began to realize, it seemed like there was a legacy that was being sort of shaped up, formed up, accumulated, that was valuable in its own right and needed protecting and saving and remembering. And I wasn't quite sure who was going to be doing the remembering, the saving, so I took it upon myself to do so. I formally founded a program with the Windhorse Guild, which is our local nonprofit organization here in Boulder, to formalize the gathering and protecting of this written and recorded legacy, and also to begin to focus on the teachers of the legacy, and also focus on helping to develop the International Windhorse Network, because the Windhorse centers are starting to proliferate around the world. So the Legacy Project was formed to be supported by donations, essentially to secure, publish, and develop the legacy and the practitioners of that legacy in the Windhorse way, and to have that be a significant and powerful voice in the worldwide recovery movement. So we were going to join the worldwide debate, the worldwide exploration of recovery from all kinds of mental illness, serious or otherwise. And this is the worldwide recovery movement. That's a whole thing in itself. But so we were going to consolidate who we were and engage in worldwide dialogue. And we've been carrying on for the last 18 years.
Yeah. So with that depth of material that you have available through the Legacy Archive, how did you select this particular work to make as the first book? How did you come up with the name also? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I was involved with these. The material in the book is our 3 seminars, what are called master's seminars that Ed Podvoll gave at Naropa University in 1985 and 1986. So I was present at these seminars. I was working with Ed closely at that time. I was something of a teaching assistant during all 3 seminars and also coordinating at least 2 of the seminars. And I remember when Ed was very enthusiastic about these seminars, and he felt like he was putting so much. In some ways, I had the feeling that he was at the crescendo of his teaching, psychiatric, clinical researching career, and he had found his true voice. It was at a kind of pinnacle of teaching, I felt. And he was very enthusiastic about these seminars. And as I mentioned when I write in the introduction, he attempted to have this and additional material published called Principles of Intensive Psychotherapy, and didn't work out, which was disappointing to him. I was part of that enthusiasm to publish this. So I felt like that commitment to see that through, I carried in a way a kind of promise to myself, or promise to Ed, and a promise to the Windhorse people and the people coming after, that someday, somehow, this was going to see the light of day. And when I went back to look at the transcripts, and we worked on the transcripts, of course, I began to see that it was covering the scope of so much of Ed's discoveries and so much of what he had to offer. I thought it was quite a comprehensive summary, really, that he was giving about his life's work. And it could be a doorway to all kinds of further study. And since we were in the Legacy Project, we're supported by donations. We don't have to create a market for a book. We don't have to make money on a book in order for it to appear. We were free of market pressures. And so we decided this was the first foray into publishing. Yeah.
And given what I know of Ed's work, this is a perfect place to start. And again, how'd the name come about?
Originally, Ed had titled this work, Principles of Contemplative Psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And that became the working title all along. But I, after a while, began to have the feeling that it was ponderous. There was something ponderous about it. It was hard to say it all at once. And it had a quality of kind of an impenetrable fortress, I felt. And that's the last thing you want a book, is to convey that it itself is an impenetrable fortress of learning. Like, who wants to convey a connotation like that? So I didn't feel it was all that inviting. And also that Ed had envisioned that the book would be based on the seminars, but there would be much more material involved, which we were not going to include. I didn't know what he was going to include in that. So in that sense, it was in some sense, a smaller, more condensed or refined version of what he envisioned. So I began to search around and talk with people about another title. And I began to realize that the title itself, Healing Discipline, somehow captured the essence of the book and captured the essence of the activity that many of us have been involved with all these years. And I also felt that we could do a service to the psychotherapeutic world we live in to reclaim, reimagine, polish up the term discipline. I feel that the term discipline itself has taken on various negative connotations, which I feel is a mistake, essentially, that it has this quality of control and punishment or worse. And so I was thinking we could rescue this term discipline and uplift that and reclaim that, because I think it also carries a tremendous sort of intrinsic meaning, actually.
Yeah.
So, healing discipline.
Yeah, right. And after having read the book, what you just described, it really is an elegant title.
Yeah.
Well, so Jeff, you just mentioned in what had been the title, the term contemplative discipline.
Yes.
And it's interesting that between the five of us in this room, I roughly did the math, knowing you all, and we probably have something in the neighborhood of 180 years of experience in contemplative psychology. So I think it would be useful if we could actually take a little time and define what is contemplative psychology, what is contemplative psychotherapy. Kathy, do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure, I can share a few thoughts about this. Yeah, so contemplative psychology and contemplative psychotherapy, within the context of this book, these teachings, we're talking about Buddhist psychology and the application of those teachings and practices in the interpersonal practice of psychotherapy, just to say that, because there are all kinds of contemplative practices, which influence a person's interpersonal practice in psychotherapy. So just to name that, as you read these teachings, that'll be very clear that this is the reference. So contemplative psychology combines the philosophy and teachings of Buddhist psychology and wisdom, along with an emphasis on the personal practice of meditation and mindfulness awareness. So that's very key in the understanding of contemplative psychology. It's a science of mind, basically. And the way this becomes real in a person's life is through the practices, the practice of meditation, in particular, mindfulness awareness meditation, or any practice that can synchronize body, mind, and environment. But in particular, what's emphasized in all of these teachings is the practice of sitting with oneself. And then one of the main principles of this psychology is that we have this inherent wakefulness, this basic sanity that is manifest in the human experience. It's there. It's inherent. It can become obstructed, it can become confused, but that confusion is secondary to it. And this is one of the main principles of Windhorse, actually, is that there is this inherent sanity, this basic sanity that we all possess, we have. And there was a particular teacher, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, who described it, who was an influential at the Naropa University in founding it, and one of our teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche, and he describes it as this: a particular attitude or distinctive state of mind, an unencumbered openness characterized by the absence of hope and fear. And this is taken from one of his published works called Transcending Madness. So those are key fundamental experiences, and actually convictions born within that come from the practice. It's like a natural unfolding. It's not something that one takes on. It arises. It's available and it can arise. And then some of the results of these practices, that one can cultivate a sense of precision in their life, gentleness, and then also an ability to let go of momentary fixed mind states, emotional states, whatever one might be caught up in, in the moment. So that's like the psychology piece of it. And then the psychotherapy, contemplative psychotherapy, is the application of that interpersonally with others. So it's the joining of personal practice and interpersonal practice is what we call contemplative psychotherapy, which is what is taught at the Naropa University. And how this can manifest is that because, or as a result of, one's inner work, which is highly emphasized in any of this training in contemplative practices and psychotherapy, is that you work with yourself first before you even dare to consider yourself in a healing relationship with others. So really plumbing the depths of what's one's own confusion and becoming really attuned and understanding the nuances of all of that, so that one can have a presence, can have a definite experience by other of being quite present in the moment. And there are many references to nowness, the experience of nowness, coming to the moment and with whatever is arising and being able to be present with that and sitting with that. So those are all emphasized. And so again, it's this conviction born within that we can actually be present to our own suffering, and we can be present to others' suffering, that kind of can create an environment actually of relaxation for ourselves and others, because there's some familiarity. There's a sense of familiarity with that, or just being open to the unknown, as if that's a small thing, but it's not. It's just practicing that spontaneous openness. And Ed Podvoll, one of his phrases was that the biggest gift we can give to a person who we are working with or in the presence, whatever the setting is our gift of fearlessness. And that fearlessness comes back to our experience with facing our own fears, or glimpses of it. This is a lot about glimpsing as well as not solidifying, like, oh, I've done that, been there, I don't have any more fears, So helping folks to actually, ourselves and others, strengthen our awareness with any state of mind. And I just want to share a little story about my experience with Ed himself. When I was a student at Naropa, and I think it was a couple of semesters into the program, and I was having questions about the program. Is this where I should be? Is it, I had questions about what was being taught. And so I asked to meet with him. So he met with me. So we met, we had a one-on-one meeting. And what I came away from that meeting was that he was embodying everything we were studying. Right on the spot, there he was. I had such a tremendous feeling of being seen and being heard, and he wasn't trying to convince me that I should stay, or that I got this wrong, or don't you understand what we're trying to do here? It was complete kind of spaciousness and openness, and I was so impacted by that. And so anyway, when I thought about contemplative psychotherapy, it was like, it's an interesting combination of a full body presence, empty presence, but then being completely there and receptive. So those are just some thoughts to launch this.
Thank you.
Kathy, I loved hearing your perspective it's so vast and it's wonderful. And when you were talking about it, I was going, well, it's almost like there's the macro and then there's the micro. And for me, it's almost like the contemplative psychotherapy, or the definition of it. It began right with myself, in that when I, by happenstance, chose to come into Naropa, the first thing I was told was to start a meditation practice. And immediately what started happening is I had all of these doubts, well, they had already been there, about my own health and sanity and anything. And so what was so powerful was, through opening and being curious and allowing space for that to start to arise, and being new to a practice, but also mentored along the way. It's almost like I took the journey of it and it developed in me and became part of the practice, because there was no separation. I learned about contemplative psychotherapy by having the experience myself, you know, of sitting on the cushion and recognizing in glimpses, like you said, my own sanity, you know, the brilliance of my own sense of self that had not been there. And then how that began to help me exhale, relax, be more at ease within my own skin. And then what does that then look like when you're starting to connect with other people? So it really started for me very personally. And then it just sort of was like a nautilus shell. It just spiraled out, but it was all connected. It was really amazing, and is amazing, continues to be.
So the book Healing Discipline, Jeff, you spoke some to this already. It's a blend of introductions, which are commentaries. Jeff, you wrote these, and it frames 3 seminars that Ed taught over 3 weekends in 1985 and 1986. And there were 3 aspects. The first one is about dreams. The second one was focusing on countertransference, and the third on Bardo teachings. And we'll discuss these individually. So to begin with, in the dream section, Blake, you've been studying dreams particularly for some years. And I'm wondering if you would begin the discussion with just some reflections on how Ed talked about dreams.
I think what I was struck most by was his approach to dreams from the point of view of making them very personal and not an analytic exercise, but using dreams as an opportunity for 2 people to come together and possibly create more intimacy in the space between them, and simply just between them getting to know each other better, and to have a deeper understanding and appreciation for the mind of the other. And his emphasis on exploring the dream without judgment, without a sense of trying to figure the dream out, but just pure listening, and having the opportunity to be able to tell your dream to someone who's listening in a very full and very present way. It seems so rare, actually. And one of the things that Ed seemed to be highlighting in his dream seminar was the practice of listening to the dream in a very full and present way, a way that doesn't include judgment or trying to figure it out or analyze it necessarily, but just to listen to the dream, to everything the person has to say, not interrupt it, and just be there with the person as a way to experience them fully, to understand what's happening with them, where they're coming from, and to allow the opportunity for a real, genuine intimacy to develop between the dream teller and the dream listener.
Blake, you're really speaking to how Ed talked about the clinical application of dream work. And given what we've named about contemplative psychology and how that flows through this whole thing, dream work also reflects on our own sense of how our dreams work and the experience of dream altogether. And so I'm just curious if anybody would have something to say, or Blake, if you have something to say about how our own personal relationship to dreams and what is a dream.
I'm going to come at it from the area that was most refreshing to read again in healing disciplines, that nighttime dreams are very magnetizing for me, and the lucid dreaming elements and how just expansive and rich they can be. But again, what was so powerful in this and being reminded over and over is how I get lost in dreams constantly in the daytime. And I am constantly drifting off and in somewhere else, someplace else, not in the moment, not synchronized in the moment. And then there is this flash of, oh, where am I? And then that sense of coming home. And within that, it's also been kind of establishing a bit of a thumbprint around my particular style of how I fall asleep, how I wake up, how is that informative or not. So it's just brilliant around how it's just constant. And it's a little bit annoying, I have to say. So I come in and out of wanting to pay attention to that. But that was really, really powerful for me to read that again. So.
Eugenie, you're reminding me of this sort of growing impression I'm having about the book as I'm reading it again in preparation for this meeting today, which is Ed's unrelenting rousing of awareness about certain areas of our ordinary lived experience that are usually hidden, kept secret, not looked at. And in some sense, he's like injecting awareness into these ordinarily ignored areas that are right in our face, which is our experience of dreaming, which we cloak in ignorance for the most part and forgetfulness. We just ignore that for the most part, even though it's many hours of the day we're involved in that. And then there's these constant relationships we're in where we're recycling our habitual patterns, countertransference. And then there's the experience of things constantly falling apart, which is the last thing we want to acknowledge, death. So I appreciated what you were saying, Eugene. You sort of, just in that moment, I felt like you were embodying, exemplifying that kind of courage that can, in some sense, cause that awareness to function. But I think without the courage and intention to wake up, which is another maybe term for that awareness, to bring it. So thank you for bringing it.
Well, these two words kept coming up for me when I was thinking about today, was disrupting and disturbing, and how those are words that have negative connotations to them. But all the way through this is how are things popped? And then what shows, what are we awake to? And that everything about this is about disrupting and disturbing so we can have a fresh look. Fresh experience, and how do we bring that into community? How do we experience it? So discipline, disrupt, disturb.
Right.
Yeah. And also discriminating. You're discriminating different experiences, different mind states. And Jeff, in your introduction to these teachings, you named that this was the cornerstone of Ed's theory of extreme mind states, mental states. So that's how it's so relevant to, the training of the psychotherapist and then working with people with extreme mind states. And in reading this, for me, the question came up, what does it mean to wake up? So what is that? Wake up to what? What are we asleep from? And so I asked some people, I kind of had a discussion around this, and Anne-Marie DiGiacomo said it's moment to moment. It's like if you say we need to wake up, it makes it sound like it's this project, and once we wake up, we're awake. It's this ongoing, it's momentary, because we live in this experience of there's a continuity to a discontinuity of our experience of being alive. It's actually discontinuous, but we string it all together, and then we have these storylines. And she also said it's never the same. And then Heather said, you wake up and you become aware of our oneness. So it was just wonderful to have a little bit of a discussion about this and
Yeah.
contemplate it. What does it mean to wake up? What are you waking up to? Why wake up? And the people we work with, why are we emissaries for this consensual reality from the reality they've created? So I'm curious what others feel or think.
It's also curious that part of the instruction to waking up is to pay attention to the stages of falling asleep.
Yeah. Yep.
And really bringing awareness to the different points of falling asleep,
Mhm.
and how that can bring obviously more awareness to what's happening when you are dreaming, and to maybe even get to a point where you can identify that you're dreaming while dreaming. And it's so interesting, since the pandemic, my dream world has become such a refuge. I've had no awareness of dreaming while dreaming, but while awake, the world has been more exaggerated in a dream sense. Just the world driving around Boulder and encountering everyone in masks, and just the society's response to what's happened has kind of thrust me into kind of a discontinuity. It's been more dreamlike than ever while awake. And so one of the questions is, what is awake and what is dreaming? And are we dreaming all the time? It certainly feels that way sometimes, which again connects us to our work with people who are in more extreme states of mind, or minds where they're not sure either. And what great intimacy that this practice can bring to understanding and being with someone who's working with that all the time,
Yes.
pandemic or not.
Mhm. Mhm.
We hope you enjoyed Windhorse Journal Entry 65, Walking the Path of Healing Discipline. Please tune in to part 2 of this conversation, to be posted on January 22nd, 2021. The group will look at the second session of the seminar in the publication Healing Discipline by Edward Podvoll, Styles of Countertransference. Part 2 offers wisdom regarding the pitfalls of rescue cure professionalism, the importance of reciprocity for the wakefulness of a healing relationship, and so much more. Thank you for listening.
Windhorse Journal is a publication of Windhorse Community Services, supporting recovery from mental health challenges at home and in the community since 1981.